Uh, I'm Kathy Collins of the Kauai Radio Group, and it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to Pono Water Planning. This is a presentation by the Sierra Club of Maui on the historic 2003 East Maui Water Consent Decree between Maui County and several local citizen groups, and how it still serves as a roadmap for Pono water planning that should be part of our Maui water use and Development Plan. This event is being broadcast live on Sierra Club Maui's Facebook page and, of course, on Akaku Channel 54. I'd like to say mahalo to our panelists, Robert Karpovich, a Paia resident, Maire Magallanes, a haiku from a haiku farming family, and Lucien Dene representing Sierra Club Maui. Also, mahalo to Rob Weltman for all of his work on tonight's presentation and his tech support tonight, and to Dan and Dana at Akaku and the whole crew there for simulcasting this broadcast live. Now, we're going to start by going back into history, 30 years back. In an effort to understand about what was proposed in haiku at that time and what actions these citizens groups took that resulted in the historic consent decree. Lucienne Dene has a short presentation to introduce our topic. Lucienne?
Mahalo, Kathy, and so glad everybody could tune in tonight. I'm Lucy Andine, and for a long time I've been the conservation chair of the Sierra Club Maui group. And at this point, I'm actually the chair of the Maui group. So really happy to have this opportunity to tell a little bit of the history of this very historic agreement between citizens groups. Sierra Club is one of the citizens group, but there are several others, and also Maui County. And I want to say at the beginning that although, of course, this is a very important plan and there are many parts of it that citizens feel have not yet, fully been implemented in terms of the consent decree, we are in discussions with Maui County about, how they can do the proper studies and things. It's not like no one cares at all. We have good people at our water department. But we do need to make sure, I think, that our water use and development plan really has like an accurate story about what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. So very happy to address that in my slideshow. Rob, could you bring up our first couple of slides? So this is about our historic East Maui Water Consent Decree. And of course, the first slide will tell us, or the next slide will tell us a little bit more about what that means. Next slide, please. So the consent decree is a citizen tool for accountable water planning. It basically asks some very simple things. It asks our county water planners to get data, to analyze environmental and financial costs. And the financial cost is a very important part because the haiku project that was proposed, these wells in haiku, are very expensive, and the infrastructure that goes along with it. It also asks that alternatives be researched and that we comply with our laws, like our community plan and our historic, our laws that honor Native Hawaiian rights. And then after you get all of this information, you make the decision. So the consent decree was signed in December of 2003. Here's an actual picture live with Mayor Arakawa. Next slide, please. So how did this all start? In 1992, citizens groups challenged an environmental impact statement, an EIS, for like 10 proposed wells and some water tanks and a 16-mile pipeline to take water from Haiku and Paia Aquifer and connect it with the main pipeline going to South Maui. So this pipe was going to go 16 miles from kind of the east edge of Haiku and all the way over to this pipeline that's over by Kuihalani Highway. The cost at that time was almost $49 million. And citizens got involved because both Paia and Haiku Aquifer had a long history of contamination with different ag chemicals because of pineapple farming. And the citizen groups also had many concerns about the cost and impacts to the local Haiku water sources because so little information was known. Next slide, please. So in 1992, the East Maui EIS proposed first 2 exploratory wells in Paia Aquifer, and these were actually already drilled by 1992. They kind of got drilled, a little bit earlier, and then there were going to be 8 additional wells in Haiku Aquifer. The total capacity would be 16 million gallons a day, and the hope was that if you had that as a capacity, you'd always be able to reliably get 10 million gallons a day and put it into that South Maui pipeline. This is a picture of one of the 2 Paia wells that was drilled, the Hamakuapoko wells. Next slide, please. So citizens' concerns included that these first 2 wells, the Hamakuapoko wells, were not properly tested for toxic chemicals. Citizens were also concerned about sort of the breakdown here. Who paid the high cost of this project, and likely the taxpayer, and then who would benefit the most? And it seemed likely that the people of Haiku really wouldn't benefit, but large landowners in South Maui who could get more water and make their land a lot more valuable, resort owners that wanted to expand or build resorts. Remember, a lot of resorts were being built around the late 80s and early 90s. All of these seemed the benefactors, but the water needs of Haiku farmers and residents were kind of ignored. There wasn't really a lot of discussion of alternatives to the Haiku plan. And there was very little information of the impacts of the wells on the streams or springs, the fisheries off the coast. And there was no real funding to collect all this data that was going to be needed. And there were no really firm studies of the aquifer capacity. Everything just seemed to be like this was a good idea because Haiku was there and it didn't have any county wells to speak of at the time. So next slide. In 1994, this lawsuit that was filed in 93 got a ruling from Judge Mossman, and he ruled in favor of the citizens. And he basically said that a new EIS was needed, a supplemental EIS, because there were serious concerns raised by the plaintiffs. And these included the water contamination, the impact on stream flows, and other issues. So in other words, citizens says that there were concerns that weren't addressed in the EIS. A judge agreed with them. And so at that time, the Maui Department of Water Supply acknowledged that the Hamakuapoko wells, which they had reported that tested clean, actually they sent the lab results to a different lab that was certified. And it turned out that the wells were pretty polluted and that they actually needed treatment to be usable at all. Next slide, please. So around that same time, 1995, the Paia Haiku Community Plan was updated. Now, all this was under discussion from 93, 94, when the wells were being discussed. And so some very strong policies were put in the community plan. And the community plan identified that water allocation was one of the chief concerns in the Paia Haiku region. And it also had a policy that was pretty clear. It said there needs to be ensure an adequate supply of groundwater for residents of the region before it's transported to other regions of the island. So that's pretty clear. But the EIS for the well plan from 93 didn't really address that. So a new EIS was prepared. Next slide. Between 1994 and 99, citizens had to return to court several times to compel Maui County to actually follow the judge's order and drill a monitor well in the aquifer and complete an updated EIS. During that time, the Water Commission did a little bit more study, And they noted that while Haiku might have a nice flow of water, the lens there, the water thickness, just wasn't very robust, that it was kind of a thin lens, and that the wells that were proposed might not yield 1 million gallons a day or more. They might just yield half that. And so, if that was the case, then the anticipated yield just wouldn't be the same from those 10 wells. They'd need more wells. Next slide, please. So around 2000, we finally got the monitor well drilled. The court had to order the county. And the head of the USGS at the time, Dr. Bill Meyer, specified a protocol to be used because we needed to determine the nature of the aquifer, whether it had water all the way from the top to the bottom, or whether there were separate little compartments of water where the streams were fed by one and the wells would only reach another. Maui County did drill this exploratory well in 2002, but it actually was drilled at a size where it could be converted to a production well. And that was specifically kind of not what was asked. It also didn't follow the USGS protocols. So we never got the answers to those questions. But the county at that time did issue a supplemental EIS on the well project. Next slide. So now we're getting to the consent decree. So this new EIS was kind of missing a lot of information, just like the first one. And so many groups commented, and even the USGS commented, and they said, well, the sustainable yield assumptions of this aquifer made in the EIS are really not accurate or up to date. And they also made a statement that was it said, the consultants appear to be more interested in proving a foregone conclusion rather than getting impartial and accurate data. And I think that's where citizens have really been asking, can we just not conclude that there's no problems? Can we look and make sure that there's no problems? So next slide. 3 citizen groups, including Sierra Club and 1 private citizen, Mark Sheehan, who was going to be a panelist tonight, but has had internet go down. They challenged this new EIS, and rather than having the matter go to court, Mayor Arakawa asked that a settlement could be signed. And so this consent decree was signed, and the plan for East Maui Wells was withdrawn, with the idea that the Hamakua Poko wells that already existed would just be the extent of the plan at that point. Next slide. So what does the consent decree say? Well, it's pretty logical. It said the county can use the Hamakua wells because they're already there. Of course, they needed to treat the water, and later the county council put restrictions on the water because the quality is uncertain. It's not just the ag pollutants, it's also nitrates that would need to be filtered, and there's no filter for them at this point. But they can use these wells for drought emergencies. The decree does not apply to any of the other county wells in Haiku Makawao area, so the county was free to use those wells. And any future wells would be part of an entirely new project, and it would have new studies and a new EIS. And the county agreed to consult with the citizen groups on the studies, give them copies of new studies or reports. In other words, kind of work with the community that had concerns. Next slide, I'm sorry. There also was a new monitor well, test well, approved in the EIS, and that hasn't been created yet, but it was approved. And the county agreed that they would do stream and marine life studies, and that those would analyze the impact on streams, springs, private wells, and citizen groups would be, consulted about when those studies were being done and so forth. Next slide. And then the old studies on the aquifer water quantity or quality could not be used. The consent decree was very clear about that. It said new studies really needed to be done. Next slide. And also, citizens wanted studies to determine the pattern of aquifer contamination in Haiku. As you can see from this map, all those yellow areas are former pineapple growing areas. And we all know that some pretty heavy-duty chemicals entered into our groundwater from pineapple production. So that red line on this map is where the original wells from the 1992 EIS were proposed. They just crossed in an area of former pineapple fields. And so it's no surprise the first two in the Paia aquifer were contaminated. The little light blue line is in the new EIS. It was a proposal that perhaps wells could be drilled at a higher elevation. These are freer from the pineapple fields. However, there is still some risk. Next slide. So the other thing is that the consent decree was very big on having a robust cost and benefit study to look at all the possible solutions for Maui's water's future, what they would cost, and lay everything out and compare and see if there was any viable alternative to going to haiku, since it was a very, very expensive project in an aquifer that didn't have a lot of information and had a history of pollution. So maybe 2 out of your 6 wells might end up having some contamination. And then, you know, what do you have to do? You can't have the water you count on. You can treat it, but will the treatment make it just as good as clean potable water? But in spite of the fact that all of this had to be done as part of the consent decree, really before any well plan was relaunched, our new water use and development plan basically is saying, there's that little circle at the bottom, that our future water plan is to have 4 million gallons come from haiku aquifer by 2030. That's like 9 years from now, and 8 million by 2035. And there really isn't a plan B in our water use and development plan. So citizens are a little concerned about that. Next slide. We're getting towards the end here. Another compliance in the consent decree is with state and county laws, and this would include the Paia Haiku Community Plan. And this is a map of the upcountry water meter list applicants, and about 400 of those people are in haiku. And you know, here wells are being drilled at great expense to provide water to a pipeline in South Maui, perhaps. But what's the plan for people in haiku? That really needs to be part of any of the costs, is serving the needs of haiku, like our community plan says, as part of any well plan for groundwater. Next slide. And then the consent decree also requires compliance with state laws that protect Native Hawaiian rights. And citizens really want the future hydrological studies for the wells to not just be, you know, I looked at my equation type of science, but to tell the whole story about how the streams and springs and oceans in haiku are connected to our local Hawaiian families and you know, 1,000 years of Hawaiian culture, and include input from people who fish and farm and gather in the haiku area. So this has not happened, but it's an intent of the framers of this consent decree that these are the kind of studies we need, because otherwise the generational farming and fishing areas may just be lost, because their groundwater will go to the wells pumping upslope. Next slide, please. And last but not least, any future haiku well plans need to include in-depth stream studies for the haiku streams and a restoration plan for those streams, because we've had a lot of studies for East Maui, but those studies stop at Kakipi Gulch. They don't go into haiku. And our streams, as you can see, are extensive and they are a lifeblood, but they are very diverted right now, and most residents have no use of them. Next slide. So to sum up, the East Maui Consent Decree provides an important safeguard to save taxpayers millions of dollars, protect public trust resources, and ensure a reliable supply of water for Maui's future. Current costs of the plan are estimated over $90 million, but there's no certainty whether 8 wells proposed will yield 8 million gallons of water. that is estimated to be needed. If there needs to be 16 wells because each well can only produce 500,000 rather than 8, costs and impacts could increase substantially. We really need the facts. Next slide. So our plan, our water use and development plan needs to be amended, and it needs to discuss the haiku wells in realistic terms. It needs to include the real requirements of the consent decree and the costs. Right now, it just says the consent decree requires some studies, but it's a lot more than that. There need to be real plans to meet haiku's own water needs. The uncertainty of the haiku aquifer water yield capacity needs to at least to be discussed. And the uncertainty of the haiku aquifer water quality needs to be clearly discussed that we don't know, but we have a lot of wells in haiku that have Department of Health tests for ag chemicals. And then the real impacts of large wells on traditional agriculture and fisheries in haiku, really, it should have been determined before we put this as a major factor in our 20-year plan. And then, of course, we don't know the certainty of actual future South and Central Maui demand on the county system. Many of the larger projects for Central or South Maui may have their own private wells or private water systems. This seems to be a trend. So our last slide, please. Mahalo for your attention, and Sierra Club Maui really welcomes our panelists tonight and looks forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Lucy. And that presentation was highly informative and enlightening. We will begin our discussion in just a moment. I'd like to reintroduce our panelists. And panelists, I'll do this one at a time. And if you would please take a moment to personalize this issue, explain to us why the consent decree is important to you. We'll start with Paia resident Robert Karpovich.
Thank you, Kathy. It's a pleasure to be here. I moved to Paia in 1984, and I've been involved in various environmental issues as a board member of Blue Ocean Preservation, a nonprofit. And I first got involved in the water issues when the rumors were they were going to drill wells up in the pineapple fields in Paia and across Maliko Gulch into Haiku. Well, it didn't seem like, as an engineer, it didn't seem like a very good idea because it was well known that the aquifers would be polluted with these organophosphate pesticides, mainly for the nematodes. So I stayed involved in the issues through all this time, and the different citizens groups ended up going to court. Unfortunately, so somehow that's how the government works here in Hawaii, that you can't really deal with the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats and the large landowners, excuse me, are on one side and the citizens seem to be on the other. So I followed this all along and through different iterations of the water use and development plan, and now it's surfaced again. And the current plan just really makes short change of everything that Lucian just presented.
I thank you for that, Robert. Next, we have from a haiku farming family. Thank you for joining us, Maile Magalianes. And if you would explain why the consent decree is important to you and your family.
Aloha, my name is Maile Magalianes. I'm a lifelong resident of Haiku. We've been involved with the water issues for about a few years now when we first began to farm kalo. And we'd like to make sure that our voices are heard and make sure that the streams are restored so that farmers, not just kalo farmers, but farmers all in the upcountry area have a resource to public trust. Thank you.
Thank you. And kalo farmers particularly, I know, have a great deal of interest in water issues. And we have, again, I'll reintroduce a woman that needs no introduction, representing Sierra Club Maui, Lucian Dene.
Mahalo, Kathy, and mahalo to the other panelists. I have to say that Sierra Club got involved in this issue. It was actually some Sierra Club members who launched some of the original complaints against using these toxic chemicals in our pineapple fields. You know, we were the last place to ever ban DBCP, and Sierra Club had a special committee to try to convince whoever would listen to not allow that chemical to keep using. And then when it turned out these wells were proposed in the same area, it's just we have a lot of members in Haiku, and we thought that, gosh, citizens needed, you know, some support. So Sierra Club got officially involved in around 2002 when the latest version of the EIS came out, and we appreciate the efforts of all the citizens groups that went before and did such a great job of explaining what was needed. But basically, we're here to support people in the community. We're here to make sure the public trust resources are well treated in our water use and development plan, that the consent decree is well explained and respected and honored. And of course, we're looking forward to having ongoing discussions with the county water planners and figure out a way that we can really get the information that we need so we can understand what the best plan would be. But in essence, we're here to make sure that the community is given a fair shake, and Haiku is a great community and deserves to have access to its streams and deserves to have you know, water for its own needs. And if it needs to share water, it should be under conditions that actually reflect known scientific data.
Thank you, Lucienne, and thank you to the Sierra Club. My father's family is from Pauela Haiku, and so I too have at least an emotional connection to the community. So our viewers can see that this panel represents a wealth of experience and a variety of aspects of this very important issue. So I have here some questions that have been prepared based on statements in the water use and development plan. From now on, we're going to call it What Up because it's easier. Can I just like saying what up? And also based on statements made by the County of Maui Department of Water Supply and general information and informational questions. So I'm just going to throw out each question one at a time and not assign them to any particular person. So panelists, please feel free to share your mana'o. This is a discussion and not a debate. So looking forward to this. Our first question: what are some of the primary concerns that caused citizen groups to file lawsuits about the East Maui Haiku well plan almost 30 years ago? And we had a nice, a concise presentation by Lucienne, but I'd also like to hear from our panelists.
Rob, you want to jump in there?
Well, I think Lucienne's slideshow really covered that, but just to reiterate, it was developing wells and polluted aquifers, exporting water out of the Paia Haiku community plan area when the needs of the Haiku residents are not being met yet. Compounding the groundwater withdrawal on top of the contentious 100 million gallon a day stream diversions. It was just too much of a slap in the face for people in Haiku to lay down and take it anymore. I think that those are the main concerns.
I'll add.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I will add to that there is the issue that Haiku, because you can't get a water meter there, 100 people have wells in Haiku, small wells. These are not county wells. These are just, you know, individual people. I have a well. I live past Haiku, but no one can get water out where I live. And so you have wells, you have people that depend on springs, and no effort was really made to study like what the impact would be. Instead, it was just thought that, well, there's so much water in Haiku that all those wells use so little, there'll be plenty for them and plenty for the county wells. But we don't really know that for a fact. And so that's a concern. And then the studies in the EISs, I wrote the Sierra Club comments for the 2002 EIS. the coastal studies were pitiful. You know, one guy came from Honolulu one day and measured a couple places along the coast and just concluded that there were no impacts. Now, I know fishermen, I'm sure Miley probably does too, and maybe even Robert, that know every single place where there's seeps of cold, fresh water coming out and the limu grows. And this is where they take generations of their family to go fish and gather. And just no one ever paid any attention to that. Like, that's just wrong. You know, that's just not a good plan. So these are some of the concerns that surfaced during the discussions.
And that sort of leads into the next question. What infrastructure is proposed for the East Maui Well plan? And do you have an estimate of cost?
Well, Rob, you looked at all those maps and stuff.
Well,
Rob, I understand you read the whole thing, every page.
there's 1,200 plus pages, which it's a very difficult read, to say the least. But besides the wells and tanks, then there's the transmission lines. So there's a question of who's going to pay for all this. One thing that most people aren't aware of are these memorandums of understanding. These are little contracts, I would call them, between usually A and B and the county of Maui, where they set forth, they set in writing their goals to work together on projects in the future. So under the East Maui Water Development Plan, this is the 2000 MOU, which is signed by the Board of Water Supply and the A and B bigwigs. It says A and B may participate in the East Maui Water Development Plan in exchange for an appropriate water allocation, subject to normal system-wide limitations. So this type of statements are often repeated, but these are really contractual agreements to allow A and B to cost share on the development in exchange for a certain unspecified percentage of the water. So this is not really laid out in the water use and development plan of who's going to get the water, who's going to get the rights to the water, can you sell these rights to other developers? And this is happening all the time with other wells and other developers, where the public is really left out of the loop. It's a public trust. Water is a public trust, and it shouldn't be bargained away to the large private landowners when we really need the water for affordable housing and small scale agriculture. So cost-wise, part of the infrastructure was put in. They put a 36-inch, that's a 3-foot pipeline from Hamakuapoko to Baldwin Avenue, and this is even after the use of the wells was banned for potable consumption by the county council. But the former mayor had $7 million burning a hole in his pocket. And I have a picture, but I couldn't put it on. It's a huge pipe when you see it. It's very impressive to see a pipe that's higher than, the chest on a lot of people. And so it's capable of carrying 25 million gallons a day. And this is in the ground, several miles of it. So that's the first phase of the infrastructure. Of course, that would then be extended to the central system and be extended over to Haiku. How they cross Maliko Gulch is undetermined. There's the picture. There's some of the pipe laying on Baldwin Avenue. It was a huge project, and it's $7 million down the drain right now because it's actually oversized to carry the 8 million gallons a day. That might be a minimum flow rate. In other words, if a pipeline is too large, it never gets properly flushed and sediment can accumulate in it. So, but this is what happens when government just does what it wants on its own without any citizen accountability, which is why everybody listening needs to be educated and work with the current council, who's a little more amenable to some practicality in how we spend our money. So the total cost with inflation, it's hundreds of millions probably for this project.
I'd like to ask Miley, Do you feel that the needs of Haiku area farmers have been well represented in the What Up?
No, it has not, because if it would, we would be growing kalo using the stream flow, but there is none, and there hasn't been any for about 20 to 25 years now. And um, not just it's not been met. They haven't reached out to farmers. I mean, there is not one single farmer, I think, that has time to read a 1,200-page report or a plan. And so when I seen it, there's no clear language about how important it was to get the flow back into our streams for our farmers and for our homes and people on the waiting list for water meters and such. So no, it's not meeting the needs of the Haiku residents.
I'll
I-
jump in on that one too. It's, haiku has just been forgotten. And it's kind of like everyone thinks, oh, there's so much water in haiku, and it's the upcountry farmers that need water, and the farming in central Maui that needs water. But there's a lot of people, I can tell you from our whole Aulea, plant sale every year. There's a lot of people who farm in haiku, but most of them don't try any row crops because they have no idea if they'll get enough water. Haiku does not have the rain that people think it does. It does in certain seasons, but then it goes away. And as everyone knows, you need steady water if you're going to have a farm. And this is where a flowing stream comes in, especially for kalo, because you could return the water to the stream after you grow the kalo. So we really need the water use plan to reflect the fact that people in haiku want to grow food for our island and for their families. And it's really a traditional farming area. Haiku School used to have a big farm next door where the community center is now. That was the Future Farmers. And they grew all the food that was served in the cafeteria, all the plant food that was served in the cafeteria. So that school was self-reliant for plant-based foods. They got local meat for the cafeteria as well. And man,
I would
go
like
in
to add to we are beginning to farm using native agroforestry techniques, which is unique to the area that we live in. And so even more importantly, we need to restore the stream flow so that we can reforest our watershed. It's important, the flow from Maka to Makai. And so not just food for farming for food, but agroforestry as well, native agroforestry.
Miley, you mentioned that you're a lifelong Haiku resident. Are you a second or third generation farmer? Was your family also involved?
So my family was more like Makai people, and they fished, they dived, they surfed. And so I would say I would be like a second generation or third generation gatherer. But now we are beginning to farm. It is with my partner now, with our husband now, we are beginning to farm. And I would say we're first generation farmers, but more so we've been here for longer than 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. It's a lifelong thing, and it's our way of life. We don't just practice it, we live it. And it's important that the panel knows, or the council knows, and the people making these regulations acknowledge that the Hawaiian people and non-native tenants, we're still here and we're farming, and you really need to listen how important it is to meet the needs of the people that you're taking from, and then maybe also state the reasons why you're taking it. Like if it's for South Maui because you're developing, maybe stop the development. We don't need any more unaffordable homes for the local people here. We need water for affordable homes and for the people who have been waiting years for water meters.
Yeah, I was going to say, if your family has been in the area for generations, as many have, through the generations, you've seen the changes in the ecosystem and the challenges that continue to arise. And well, I thank you for that, for your input. The What Up notes that the department has a goal of reducing demand on the Iao aquifer over the next 20 years, and that the only nearby aquifer with the capacity to develop alternative water source would be Haiku. So is this saying that Haiku is the only choice that the county has for future water sources?
I'll jump in on that. Uh, there's one major chart that reduces the thousand odd pages. It's their in their the What Up addendum where it balances demand and supply. So it's the county's trying to reduce the pumping of the EAL, although it's technically different aquifers. I'll call it all EAL aquifer area, from 20 million gallons a day down to 16 and a half, which is an admirable goal because we know that we're sucking up salt in those wells, and that's not good. But on the balance side of how to take that pressure off of those wells, there's reuse of reclaimed water. When you substitute reclaimed, which is R1 treated sewage water, to allow people to irrigate with it instead of with EAL water, then you're naturally taking the demand off of EAL. Well, Kihei is doing something. They have 2 million gallons in 2020, but by 2035, they have 2.2 million gallons of recycled water, which is really pathetic because all they're waiting for is to run a few pipelines from the sewer treatment plant to other potential users. That a cost benefit analysis would show that that's probably a lot cheaper than drilling these wells in Haiku. So there's a couple of million gallons a day there that could be taken off of EAO. And then notably for Kahului wastewater plant, they have nothing on their balance sheet right now and nothing in 2035. In other words, they're accounting for no reuse of all this water that just gets injected into basically into the ocean. So with some creative thinking, they could run pipelines from the Kahului wastewater plant to areas for irrigation where people are now irrigating with EAL potable water. So there's two areas right there. There's also desalinization of brackish wells in Kihei or McKenna area. Mark was going to speak to that. Unfortunately, he's not with us. There's lots of ways where they can find millions of gallons a day of water that they don't address at all in this plan. They need to put all these things in writing with some costs next to them, present this like an engineer would to somebody he's trying to sell this to, and for the public and for our decision makers to see some numbers behind the alternatives. Right now, there's no numbers and no alternatives. Their water balance is strictly take this 8 million gallons from Haiku, which maybe is a pie in the sky, and that balances everything out. But that's really all they give is the 8 million gallon number and very little other information. Very disappointed in the plan. It's hard to see how the council can really go through and analyze this until we put some dollars and cents behind it.
I'd like to jump in.
Thank you, Rob.
When you look at what is needed for the future of Central and South Maui, the Water Use and Development Plan, if you read it, it's like buried in the details. It mentions that most of the Central Maui projects that are planned, and there's some large projects, there's like 500 acres that's going to be developed as Waikapu Town and 500 acres that's going to be developed as Waiali, and some more development along the hills between Waikapu and Wailuku and so forth and so on. Most of those are said to have their own separate water sources, new wells in Waikapu, existing wells in Maui-Lani. It's not thought that those are particular developments are going to need water from Haiku. Now, maybe there's other developments in the pipeline that we don't know that might in the future need water, but there's also the county effort to acquire the Nava'eha system. Right now, probably most people don't really follow that very closely. But Wailuku Water Company has an allocation of 3 million gallons that they sell the water to one of the golf courses. So we're using like really good Iao stream water that the county also treats and sends to people, and we're sending it to a golf course. So could we find 1 million gallons and tell the golf course, gee, you need to drill a brackish well to irrigate your golf course, because a higher priority is our affordable housing in Central Maui that we need this water for, or affordable housing in South Maui. None of those things are actually looked at in the water use plan. You really need what the consent decree asks, this broad cost benefit analysis on all these different scenarios. We do know that the water use plan does anticipate that some large projects will not be on the county system. They think that, you know, projects in Hali'imaile and so forth will create their own water source. So one of the things that could be suggested is some of these luxury developments like McKenna Resort just have their own wells and create their own water source and not rely on the county system. And McKenna, of course, paid some money long ago to be part of the county system, but it hasn't worked out. So there's a lot of things to consider here that might be, 1 million gallons here, a 500,000 gallons there. And before you know it, you've saved enough water to actually have water for the future.
Before we move on to the next question, I see that viewers are asking whether they can post their own questions. And all I can say is that we do have a number of already prepared questions and a limited amount of time. But hopefully your own question, our viewers, will be answered in the procedures tonight. If not, please go ahead and post your questions anyway. I know that later on we'll be telling you how you can stay in touch with the Sierra Club and not only keep updated on the different developments, but hopefully get answers to your questions should they not be addressed during this panel discussion. So let's move on to the next question. And hopefully, as I say, our viewers' questions will be answered in the course of this panel discussion, because the questions that were prepared are pretty far reaching. And so let's just move on to the next. So the State Water Commission has stated that they've set the safe yield of the Haiku aquifer based on the most conservative estimates, and that more recent data suggests that Haiku aquifer will actually have more water recharge under future climate conditions. Does this information relieve concerns by the parties to the consent decree?
Miley, what do you think?
Well, I was at the Water Commission presentation a few nights ago at the Haiku Community Association meeting, and it seemed that the way that they were coming up with the numbers was more about equations and didn't really involve talking to anyone who lived in the area and had generational knowledge of the land or the water. The Ahamoku from Hamakualoa had not been a part of the discussion. Neither did the Ahamoku from Hana. And it seemed like the Water Commission presenter didn't actually know where Haiku was, because he kept pointing to Kenai on the map and was talking about the Ko'ola water. And it doesn't build a lot of trust that these water estimates don't include knowledge of the families who have lived here for generations.
Well, I will build on that by saying that they use these equations that are based on, sort of ideal scenarios. And does Haiku have an ideal scenario? The estimates say that it has more water than the Iao aquifer, but I think you'd find very few people in Haiku, especially well owners, that would agree with that, because there are no big wells in Haiku, except the Dowling well that could pump 1 million gallons a day. But all the other wells are much more smaller capacity. And there's no geological formations at the coast that would like kind of hold the water in. Like the Iao Aquifer has this limestone lining at the coast, and so the head levels build up very high there. They're like 10, 15 feet when where the wells pump. Our head levels don't build up that way. The water turns into the sea, which thank God for that water because it's what recharges our fisheries. But if you have a lot of wells pumping a 500,000, 750,000, that water may not return to the sea, and you may not get very large, deep head levels. So you just have to keep having more wells or try to pump more to, get the water that you need. So this is where the really in-depth studies to fully understand the aquifer are needed. And I was at that presentation too, and it just seemed like I'm sure their equations are used all over, but do they really apply to haiku? It didn't seem like any of them really knew about haiku or had ever been there.
Okay, well, the what up refers to county water studies done in 2013, which is, wow, time goes quickly. That's 8 years ago. That show Haiku Aquifer to be an excellent location for future county wells. Have the parties to the consent decree been able to review those specific studies?
Uh, they weren't sent to Sierra Club. And I don't think I did check in with one of the other coalition members. They hadn't seen the studies either. So if the county did those studies with the idea that they were for this haiku well plan, they didn't divulge them to the participants in the consent decree. Maybe their thought was that they were just general studies, but they're not on the county's website. It'd be nice to see them and to see how robust the actual data research was.
And so they weren't, these studies that are referred to are not actually contained within this document, Robert, since you've actually reviewed the what up?
Not, there's little snippets here and there, or but the study aren't really fully contained to where someone could review them. For all of its, the document is so long, and they often compare apples to oranges, and then apples to grapefruit, and then oranges to grapefruit. Because the way the document is structured, it's very hard to follow. There's the piping system, which is what we're familiar with, and there's aquifers. Then they group aquifers into aquifer sectors, and then overlap community plans. So if you try to draw the circle chart for subsets of things, you couldn't really follow what they're getting at. They really need to scrap this what up and reorganize it so that the council the public can understand it.
Okay, well, Lucienne, you kind of touched on this next topic a bit, but so the Department of Water Supply has pointed out that currently the Haiku community relies on water imports from other areas as well. And they have stated, the department has stated, that water from the Makawao aquifer wells serves Haiku, and water from Iao aquifer serves Paia Kuao, and surface water from East Maui serves Hali'imaile, and all of these communities are within the Haiku Paia community plan, the area served by the plan. Is this accurate? And if so, would that make a good case for pumping water in Haiku and pipelining it to Central and or South Maui?
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
for it.
Yeah. I'd like to say, no, it doesn't make a good case. I mean, the ditch water now that goes to the Hali'imaile treatment plant, I think they average 3.4 million gallons a day of treated water. And that gets pumped up to Kula. And in a drought, that services all of Kula at great pumping expense to pump it way uphill. And I don't know anybody in East Maui that's objected to 3 or 4 million gallons a day of ditch water servicing Kula and the Kula ag part. So there's just not an objection there. Haiku has its own well and private wells, and very little water really comes down from Makawao to Haiku. And Paia, well, Paia has been on the EAO system since, well, before I was here in 1984. The old timers say that Paia was on a plantation system, and you take a Bull Durham bag, a tobacco bag, and put it over your tap to filter your water. And yeah, we're very thankful that the pipeline was extended out to Paia. It serves mostly local residents. Most of this information is from my 100-year-old neighbor behind. She's just amazing, a wealth of knowledge. So no way does this relate to drilling multiple wells and running a 36-inch pipeline across the island to feed luxury development on the other side. The current systems were cobbled together as the need arose over the decades. And it's an imperfect system as is. Sometimes they're mixing groundwater and surface water. They have different pHs, different treatment requirements. And but our county makes it work. We all get pretty good water right now. But they need to look at improving at servicing affordable housing and local residents, not exporting a huge amount of water at great expense.
Gosh, I'd forgotten all about that. I remember as a child, both in Haiku and staying at my aunt's house in Hali'imaile, everybody had the little Bull Durham bag over their tap in the kitchen, in the kitchen sink. And yeah, and then every so often you'd dump out all the junk that came out of it. Okay, the What Up suggests, and we did touch on this issue a little earlier. The What Up suggests that Haiku is the only aquifer near the county's central Maui water system that could supply the full 8 million gallons per day from one source to meet 20-year growth estimates for central Maui. But, and especially you, Robert, I know that you have been studying this whole issue in depth. Would the county have any alternatives, other alternatives?
But not to get 8 million gallons at one big source. Like we discussed before, it's reducing demand through conservation, through reuse of recycled water. So I guess we have to take argument with the premise that they have to get 8 million gallons from Haiku when there's
from a single source.
There's also we're looking at the other aquifers in the West Maui Mountains. There's actually some water as you go north toward Kohakaloa that's on tap that they kind of dismiss that offhand, though we're not even going to discuss that. Like Lucy Ann said, 500,000 gallons here, 1,000,000 gallons there. There's also, I mean, unfortunately, the Paia aquifer under the sugarcane fields has been polluted, not just the DBCP, but atrazine and other chemicals, and it continues to be polluted. I think Mahi Pono is a big user of chemicals. I personally know people that have gotten very sick that work for them. So it would take a lot of treatment costs to make the water potable. So maybe substituting it for irrigation for golf courses, things like that could free up some more water.
I'd like to add a couple of thoughts. I agree with Rob that is the 8 million gallon goal, does it have to be from one place, number one? And the Kahakaloa plan was dismissed, and I think rightfully so, by the county water planners, because it's a lot of expense, and in the end, they might get 3 or 4 million gallons of water. It's an unknown quantity. Well, I would say pretty much the same is true with Haiku. You don't know how many wells you're going to get that are good, clean wells that don't require expensive treatment. And we have a deal that we can get payment from Shell to treat water until 2039. But after it expires, it's $150,000, $200,000 a year to replace the filters. So, long term, I think we need to look where we can get clean water. And the best way to get clean water is to look where clean water is going for non-potable purposes right now. And our friends in South Maui, it's a wonderful place. I spend a lot of time there. A lot of my friends live there. Rob lives there. But they use 14 million gallons a day of water there, and their sewage treatment plant treats about 5. So what does that tell you? That humans are not using, maybe 8 million gallons a day, 7 million gallons a day of that water for human uses. They're using it for swimming pools or lawns or landscaping. And a lot of it is used not by your simple homeowner, but by large resorts. We have several resorts in Maui that when you cobble them together, they're the biggest water users of the county system. And they use over 1 million gallons a day when you put them all together. So, and they use most of it for landscape. They use some for their clients, but they use it for landscape. So is there a way that we can have a transition plan over 20 years where instead of that million gallons for landscape or 2 million or 3 million for landscape purposes, that we gradually replace it with non-potable water, with R1 water, with brackish wells, with, God forbid, landscaping that doesn't require that much water like California has been doing. And we free up that good potable water that we already have in our system. It's the cheapest water we have to be used for our new homes, to be used for our future growth. The county says, of course, we're figuring all that in. We figure that we could have 8% water conservation, and that would amount to quite a few million gallons over the next 20 years. But they said, we've already figured all that in, and there still isn't enough. We still need that extra 8 million. I wonder if we ought to look at our projected growth figures. I read the old 92 plan for the Haiku Wells, East Maui Wells, and it projected that 5 million gallons would be needed in central Maui to build out Maui Lani. Well, Maui Lani ended up drilling their own wells, and they use around 1 million gallons a day, not 5 million. I don't know if we have the crystal balls we need to know everything about what future use is going to be, but pinning down, doing a really robust cost-benefit analysis and getting as much data as we can, I just think would really serve us, because we'd be heading in the right direction. I know Mark wanted to mention the idea of these reverse osmosis treatment. There is one development in South Maui, the one by the Silver Sword Golf Course, that's already doing reverse osmosis. That's their water supply, an on-site well. Could other developments in South Maui that are very expensive developments provide their own water, and it's more costly water, but pay to treat it, and leave the more affordable water from Iao Aquifer for those who are trying to build affordable housing for our residents? Do we need some social engineering here, as well as looking at just the environmental costs? So the 8 million is never going to come from one place. It may not even come from Haiku without huge impacts. So I think we should make sure, do we really need 8 million? And what do we need? And what are the 4 or 5 different options we have to get portions of what we do need and make sure we have a reliable water supply?
And when you mentioned Mark, I should point out that you're speaking of Mark Sheehan, who was to be one of our panelists this evening, but unfortunately couldn't join us because of technical issues. Couldn't get his stream going. Pardon the pun. Sorry.
Yeah.
You bring up an interesting point. I can't remember the name of it, but a certain type of landscaping in which, rather than trying to grow, turn desert areas into lush tropical paradise, you go with what the natural environment already um, has supported for many years. And I think it was Arizona um, some years ago driving through it, and I was just amazed at how they had changed their line of thinking into the miles and miles of roadside land rather than irrigating and trying to grow things that just had a really tough time surviving. They just went with a more desert look because that's what they've got is desert. And I wonder if that could be worked into, as you say, rethinking our landscaping and cutting back on use. It's like one way to save money or to make more money is to not use as much money.
Mhm.
Same with water, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna get a little. I have a feeling this is going to raise some hackles, but the Department of Water Supply has stated that they have made efforts in the past 5 years to conduct groundwater studies of the Haiku aquifer, and that those efforts have been blocked by the plaintiffs in the East Maui consent decree. Is this accurate?
Well, I wish Mark was here to speak to this too, because he sat through so many of these meetings, but I sat through most of them. Basically, what this is referring to is the county, I think around 2015 or so, suggested doing a test well in Haiku, which is required by the consent decree and would have been very welcome. But the test well was proposed right next to the existing Dowling well. And all along, I think all the people who are involved with the consent decree have really wanted to get a reliable view of the whole Haiku aquifer. So we already have a well at the Dowling site. We could get information about, uh, the salinity of the water, the temperature of the water, those sorts of things from that well. What would make sense is to choose a better location. And we actually had some locations that we recommended. This was all discussed and thought out, but it was kind of ignored. And unfortunately, it paints the parties to the consent decree as bad guys because they didn't want to drill this well. But we would have been happy to support a well in the right place. The other thing was the county went ahead to drill the well. They issued a request for proposals, and they never did any environmental review or anything. And they didn't inform us. Dick Mayer saw it posted on the county website and let people know. He said, "Wow, did you know about this?" And no one did. So this went to court, unfortunately, and the judge totally agreed with the plaintiffs in the consent decree. He goes, "Yeah, consent decree did not say you go and do things this way." So the county may feel that the plaintiffs, are going back on their word of what they want, but the court agreed that this was not a proper procedure. And so it never happened.
Okay, thank you for that, Lucienne. And maybe Miley would want to address this next question. The what up appears to suggest that the Haiku aquifer could be pumped at moderate amounts below its sustainable yield of 24 million gallons a day, even before in-stream flow standards were set for Haiku streams without any harm. Would this be an acceptable strategy under the consent decree? Oh, my.
Well, at the commission at the Haiku Community Association meeting the other night, the Water Commission, there's no deep monitor well for the Haiku aquifer, and they don't seem to have any plans to research the streams of Haiku. So if this was the county's Kuleana, then these studies would be taking place. I've attended Navai Eha stream hearings from to set flow standards from way back in 2006 and 7, and that process takes years. So these studies for Haiku should have started already, because we as farmers and generational residents in Haiku really need to know that we can use the stream water, and our children, our keiki, need to know what the streams look like. And And also what's important is the ecosystem in those streams. Back when my grandma was my age, it was abundant. The stream life was abundant, and like now I have no memory of that. I've never seen that. I've never witnessed it, but I've only heard stories. So I appreciate the groups who got the dissent decree approved standing up for haiku streams. It's long overdue for the water to be restored.
Thank you, Miley. Uh, we've got time for at least maybe one more question. And then I'd like to give each of you a couple of minutes to for closing comments and remarks, address anything that you feel we haven't touched on, or to make a stronger case for your own personal opinions. But let's see. The Department of Water Supply has informed the County Council that the What Up proposes further exploration of haiku well development by first initiating hydrologic studies and compliance with the terms of the East Maui Water Development Plan consent decree. Are the consent decree parties satisfied that the current draft of the What Up is crystal clear in this?
Well, as representing Sierra Club, which is only one of the three parties, I cannot speak for the other two parties, but I know our Sierra Club folks are really concerned that the plan kind of gives the consent decree light version. And Rob may agree with this because I think he's read the terms of the consent decree. It kind of acts like we'll do a few hydrological studies, everything will be okay, and then we'll pump these wells. And by the way, we can just start pumping. If once those studies are done, we can start pumping, even if there's no stream flow standard set. And I mean, this is just not right. The stream flow standard should be set. We should have had a monitor well in place years ago. I mean, it's great that we're starting now, but our water use plan is not giving a realistic view of what the consent decree asks. It doesn't really refer to the community plan on the same page as the consent decree and how that's going to be worked in. It does refer to the community plan and its language in different sections, but it's like this is one package. It's like the consent decree is about everything that would make things right for people in haiku, and our water use plan really needs to do a good job of presenting that. And I think the council wants it to do that. And tomorrow, for those of you who are watching, on the 2nd of March, our agricultural and public trust committee of the council will be discussing the haiku water needs. So you can tune in at 1:30 on Blue Jeans, at the county website. And I think we have a link on our Sierra Club page. And I think we sent out some reminders to people, but it'll be an interesting discussion to watch. I think the council does believe that people from haiku need to be better heard and better represented, and the consent decree needs to be better explained, and the path to comply with it better identified in the water use plan.
Thank you. Does Miley or Robert want to add to that? If not, I do have one final question of my own that just kind of popped into my head as I'm being educated this evening. So we all, we here in Hawaii understand water is life. And Miley mentioned that not only has she been, deeply and personally involved in the East Maui issues, but has attended all of the Navai Eha hearings and followed that process. Have any of the parties to the consent decree or Haiku Paia residents, have you conferred with folks from other counties, other islands, because you know that the issue of water use and access is not just limited to Maui Island. We know that. And in terms of strategies or I don't know. I just kind of throw that out.
That's a great question. I'll give one little incident. When we were reviewing the EIS in 2002, I was in touch with some friends on the island of Hawaii, some other Sierra Club, folks over there, and they pointed out that they had some studies on their coastlines that showed that a new well could have, a new well use that hadn't been there for years and years could have a significant impact on the amount of discharge that came out along the coast in the springs and the fresh water that affect our fisheries. And that USGS actually had done a little study over there and had written some things up, and they sent me the link to it, and I quoted those in my comments. So I did reach out to Sierra Club members on at least the Big Island, and they pointed out that they faced the same issues, that they needed to convince their powers that be that the coastal discharge of water was really a protected use and really an important use. It wasn't wasted water, So that's my story with that.
Would Miley or Robert like to comment on that?
Well, I used to live on the Big Island, and I had property on the Big Island, and I had a farm with my parents, and the water department over there seems a bit more transparent in requiring potential developers to identify their own water sources before you get to step one as far as any zoning or subdivision process. Here, it's quite controversial at times where things got pushed forward without any real water commitment. And the developer says, well, now we have a vested interest and the county owes us the water, and some kind of deal is made. So I would say that the politics on the Big Island are a little bit more above board than I'd like them than I've seen here on Maui. Not to knock anybody here, but anybody has followed the in-stream flow standards and in East Maui for decades and decades, and the poisons being put on the fields after being warned and being told, oh, it'll never reach the groundwater, and then guess what? It reaches the groundwater. It goes on and on and on Maui, and I just like to encourage people to be more informed and hold their government accountable, and to help educate their government to prevent future problems.
And toward that end, Lucian mentioned this, but I would like to remind our viewers that the County Council's Committee on Agriculture and Public Trust will be discussing the haiku section of the draft Maui Water Use and Development Plan tomorrow afternoon at 1:30. You can tune in and watch on Akaku, and comments on the plan will be taken over the next several months. So this is an opportunity for you to not only become more informed, but also to make your opinion known. And I think Lucienne said that through the Sierra Club also, are you going to be showing the meeting on your page as well?
I'm not sure. I think
okay.
To it. We have a Sierra Club newsletter coming out tomorrow that has a link. So certainly our people that receive our newsletter will get that link. But we can try to make sure it's posted in various places. But you can just go to the county website, just Google APT app committee, and it takes you to a website, and you can click on the agenda, and it takes you to the Blue Jeans meeting.
But Blue Jeans meeting, or you can watch on Akaku.
Yeah. But I think Sierra Club will be sending out updates about how to post comments, because we're trying to keep people informed.
And if you'd like to stay updated on the issue itself, you can contact Sierra Club Maui and sign up for alerts. And Lucienne, can you tell us how to do that?
Well, we have an online petition, and I believe it's on our Facebook page, and it's about haiku water. And so if you sign that petition, then we send alerts whenever anything's happening, like these county council meetings or tonight's presentation, or presentations by others. So we try to keep up with people who are actually interested in this issue directly. So the petition's also on the Haiku Community Association website. It's on a variety of websites have been posted. So I think it's something like uh, haiku people need to be heard, something like that. I'm sorry, we should be posting it on the Facebook. Maybe Rob can post it on the link to the petition on the Facebook feed, and so
Yeah,
people
there you go.
it can do that. Yeah.
So we have enough time for each of you to give a few minutes of closing comments, and I think we'll just go in the same order in which you were introduced. We'll start off with Robert.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Lucianne, for all this hard work. I think I've made it abundantly clear it's so important for the community to be informed and to get involved. This isn't just an 8 million gallon number. It's the water use and development plan. It's really structuring the future of our island. And I really feel just giving a blank check for 8 million gallons to be doled out as somebody pleases is not what our plan should say. We really need to support water for affordable housing and rein in on wasteful luxury development that we really don't need. So it's a big issue, and everyone just really needs to spend some time to be informed and to work with our council. Fortunately, the current head of the water committee is quite amenable to working with us. What up got sent from almost from a first vote back to committee because of citizens' complaints that the report was too long and too technical and a lot of numbers and charts, but didn't really give a narrative of the big picture of what we're doing with our water for the next 20 years. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. Um, Miley, you have closing thoughts to give us?
Well, first, thank you, Lucienne, for involving me in these matters and encouraging our family to speak out and be vocal about it. I'd also like to thank you, Kathy, for having us here tonight. I also want to encourage everyone there to, out here, viewing this, to plant native plants, and that will help our ecosystem thrive a lot better than the invasive, nice looking, things that people have out there. Be mindful of your landscaping techniques. Like, just my whole life, I feel like we've been in a drought, and it's like my whole life, 30 years of living, I swear I've heard conserve, 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 but no one ever tells the hotels to conserve, and no one ever tells, our visitors to conserve, or like, just be mindful, of our practices, and speak out, and speak out for those who don't have time to speak out. Like, I didn't have time to read a 1,200 page report or plan, and I needed help to even understand it, and I feel like if it was more legible and more understandable for someone like me, a lifelong resident here whose real main concerns are restoring stream flow so that our island can thrive on its natural ecosystem, and for our kalo farmers and for our residents. And I agree that the water should be used for affordable housing and farming, and not luxurious homes that will sit empty or not affordable. And also maybe change the ag laws, and people out there receiving ag water rates. I'm not on an ag water rate and I farm kalo, but those people out there receiving in Laniopoko or in Kihei, or somewhere in Wailuku, they have ag water rates, and what are they growing? Like the very minimum. That things need to change, and the county needs to
be held accountable. So I appreciate the opportunity to voice that here. Thank you.
Thank you, Miley. And before I give Lucienne the last word, I do want to say at the beginning of this program, I mentioned how we have this panel represents a wealth of experience, but also a wonderful variety of aspects of this huge issue. And Robert, you've got, you're like the mind, you're the academic, you read all of that, you understand all of these scientific concepts and all of that. Miley, I would say you are the heart of it. I have so enjoyed listening to your side of it, your presentation. I can see it is a passion. It's not personal only because you are a farmer, but it goes deeper than that. And Lucienne, of course, longtime Sierra Club and other activists. You're the soul. We got the mind, heart, and the soul. And I found the word. The word is xeriscaping,
Yes.
spelled with an X, where you landscape um, in a manner that requires little or no actual irrigation. You go with the natural, as Miley had talked about the form of really Hawaiian sustainability and going with what your land, the natural landscape is already doing. So okay, and Lucienne, you've got the last word.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Kathy, just coming, in here on this topic that, I mean, everyone knows something about water, but you just jumped in and you did a great job in keeping us all human as usual. And I want to thank Rob Weltman, who went through, all these permutations to get all the links right and everything. He's made this happen. We would not be seeing this today if it wasn't for Rob and his very hard work. And as you can see, he likes to hike more than spend time in the computer, but he's willing to give his time here. And my fellow panelists, it is inspiring that people care in our community, and our communities of Paia and Haiku care very, very deeply about our resources, about our people, about our future. And so this tonight is about our future. I'm going to quote Mark Sheehan, who could not be here tonight, but who was one of the first to kind of get involved in this whole matter of the haiku wells, because as he says, we're not talking about the farmers here. We're talking about taking something from an area that's already given all of its streams, that's already seen its aquifers partly polluted, where people need to try to drill little wells to get water, and they're not sure if they're going to get clean water. And now we're going to go after what's left, which is possibly any good water we can find and take it someplace else. He said, without having the knowledge of how our aquifer works, of what its true capacity in each distinctive little area, for all we know, each stream valley of Haiku has a different capacity. We don't know. There's never been, really any data on it. He said, this is like planning a trip, and you buy your tickets and you make all your itinerary and you never check your bank account. You have all these great plans for your future. You're going to go all over the world and you never checked your bank account to see if you could actually afford it. And Mark said, these kind of plans are just that kind of oops, we really forgot something. So we do need to move forward with the county. We need to get data, and we need to get data that includes the people, that really includes a perspective of the people who've lived here for generations. We invited some folks from the Ahumoku Council to be here tonight, and unfortunately they had a scheduling conflict, and we kind of wanted to do the date tonight because of the council meeting tomorrow, just to have people understand, what's on the table for the next few months that the council might be discussing. But the Ahumoku Council in Hamakua Loa and Hamakua Poko, they are concerned that their views get involved in these studies, that it's not just science with no heart, science with no generational knowledge. So hopefully, as we move forward, all of this is going to come together in one vision that's going to actually be cost effective and reliable for our future water. And it may not be 8 million gallons a day from Haiku. It may be a couple of wells in Haiku that help up country and Haiku residents. It may be spreading things around. It may be finding new solutions that actually are more cost effective than spending $100 million. And we just need to do the hard look and get the real data and really talk to the people about, what the conditions are where they live.
Thank you, Lucienne. If your questions was not answered during the course of this discussion, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'm sure the Sierra Club welcomes your comments on the Facebook page. Don't forget about the committee meeting tomorrow at which this issue will be addressed. And as Lucienne and Miley and Robert have said, stay informed, stay involved, because I have a feeling this is not going to be the last public forum that we have on this topic, right, Lucienne? Mahalo to our friends at Akaku as well for simulcasting, and most of all, mahalo to you, our visitors, our viewers, for visiting the website or turning on the channel 54 and taking part in our discussion. On behalf of all of our panelists and Rob Weltman and the crew at Akaku, I'm Kathy Collins, thanking you sincerely for watching, and we hope to see you tomorrow, 1:30. Aloha.